Hi there, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Saira, the show where I answer your burning questions about mental health, spiritual growth, and personal development. We've got lots of questions, keep them coming, and I'm going to share with you a question today on boundaries. So the question comes from Roshi, and she says, Dr. Saira, I've been following your lessons on boundaries, but I noticed that when I say no, I feel guilty. How do I deal with the guilt when I set those boundaries? So again, I've been following your lessons on boundaries, but when I say no, I feel guilty. How do I deal with the guilt when I set boundaries? This is a really good question, and it's something that's come up in our groups as well, is how do we deal with the guilt? We know we need to set boundaries, we know it's good for us, we know self-care is important, but then we feel guilty. So what is that about? Why does it happen? Okay, here we go. So first, I want to talk to you about the difference between guilt and shame. Okay, so guilt and shame. So when we think about what is guilt and what is shame, they're kind of different things. And one of the ways I've heard it kind of explained in the field is that guilt is about I've done something wrong, and shame is about there's something wrong with me. Okay, so guilt is I've done something wrong, and shame is there's something wrong with me. Now, guilt is actually adaptive. We need to feel guilty sometimes for doing something wrong, or else we'd be doing bad things to each other all the time. Like, that's the definition of sociopath, right? Somebody who doesn't feel bad for doing the wrong things. So that's guilt. And guilt is adaptive, and guilt is necessary for us to survive in our societies and communities. Shame, on the other hand, is not adaptive. What shame does is it chips away at your self-esteem. Because with shame, we're saying not I did something wrong, but that there's something wrong with me. And you know, when I hear, I mean, I do it too, and I'm trying to work on it. What do we say to our kids? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? It's like, no, nothing's wrong with you. This behavior needs to be modified, right? Whether it's the tone of voice or whether it's the cleaning up the toys or whatever it is, it's not something's wrong with you. It's that you're doing something that needs to be corrected. And so if we think of that when we're defining those terms, guilt and shame, then I want you to ask yourself what you're actually feeling when you're setting boundaries, right? So if you're feeling ashamed, right? If you're feeling like that really like self-conscious, overwhelming, like the heat of shame, that's because you think there's something wrong with you that you have to set these boundaries, right? So it's like this weird unconscious mind thing that's happening. It's like, well, doing this thing means something's wrong with me. I am wrong. I'm intrinsically flawed, and so I feel bad, right? If you're feeling guilty, it's because you're telling yourself that setting boundaries is wrong, or setting this particular boundary is wrong. And that's something you want to look at, because maybe it is, right? Maybe this particular boundary is an unfair ask or an unfair limitation. Maybe it is. But generally, I found the people who are asking these questions about feeling bad to set boundaries tend to be givers, right? Tend to be givers and have a hard time saying no or not getting involved, or like saying I need some time for myself. They generally have a hard time doing that. So if you're worried about saying no and it makes you feel guilty to like not go along with things, then likely it's a skill you're learning, and that's why it's uncomfortable, right? So at first it's going to feel bad. Just like when you first start working out, it feels bad for a bit, right? Like the first time I started lifting weights at the gym, felt bad for a few days. It felt uncomfortable in my body, right? But the more you go and the more you practice, you build up those muscles, right? The more walking you do, the easier it is to walk. The more yoga you do, the more flexible your body, right? So the more you set boundaries, actual healthy boundaries, the easier it will become for you. It won't be so emotionally evocative every time you set a boundary. So I would say for those who are just learning, just starting out on setting boundaries, maybe you haven't even heard the word boundaries, and this is like all like, what is a boundary? So a boundary is basically letting other people know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. There's lots of ways to do that, but that's the easiest way of thinking of it. So if this is new for you, if you're not used to doing that, yes, it will feel bad at the beginning. but that will change. And so I would say, Roshi, about your guilt, to ask yourself, am I actually doing something wrong? Maybe I'm doing something different than I've ever done before. Maybe I'm doing something different than my family or that the people around me do, but is it wrong? Is it wrong? Is it going to threaten the survival of the group, right? Because that's why it happens, because we want groups to stay cohesive. Now, groups cannot stay cohesive if there are members in the group that are filled with resentment and filled with anger because they're not able to ask for what they need. So those are my thoughts about boundaries and guilt. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have a question that you want me to answer, a burning question, send it in and I'll have a look at it. And also visit Dragonfly Wellness Center, where there's a lot going on. So we've got coaches, we've got therapists, we've got energy workers, we've got blogs, we've got videos, we've got an academy. There's so much going on. So check out Dragonfly Wellness Center if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.